All right. So I just want to start off by just thanking Pastors Matt and Christy for giving me the opportunity again to be able to deliver the message here today. Just an honor to be able to do that and just continue to just challenge, stretch, and encourage me. I think they really make sure I practice what I preach, so I'm definitely like a person that loves next steps. I always encourage people to take their next steps. So they're just really making sure that I'm taking my next step too as well. So honestly, I thought when I did this last December, I thought that was like it. I thought I checked that off. I thought that was like the bucket list thing. It wasn't even on my bucket list, by the way. Like I didn't really want to preach. But God always has bigger plans, goals, challenges for you to make you just a better person. And that's really what I'm going to be talking about today. It's going to be kind of a little bit of a challenging kind of message. So this time, as Pastor Matt mentioned, I'm going to be talking about faithfulness. And it's probably because, as he mentioned, me and my wife, we're always here. And it's not just church, too. So I'm the same way kind of at my job as well. So recently, I put on my Facebook a screenshot of my paid time off that I have at my job. And I've been working at universities and colleges for about, 16, 17 years at this point. And I work at Iowa Western Community College. So we have our vacation paid time off, and then we also have our sick paid time off. And every July, they kind of recalculate that and see which ones carry over. So I saw it, and I was even a little bit surprised, but I saw it, putting those two numbers together, I have over like 1,000 hours of paid time off that I'm just not using at all. I have to use it this year, otherwise I'm going to lose a big chunk of it. So like I have to go on vacation or something, or get sick. Hopefully I don't get sick, but I need to do something this year to kind of make sure I'm doing those hours. But for both church and work, it kind of highlights something for me. Because I always get asked this all the time whenever I'm at a different church. And we've been a part of 3 different church plants at this point. And people always ask, don't you get tired of always like waking up early? We've always been part of like portable churches as well. So it's getting up early, setting things up, making things, whatever we're at, look like an actual church, and then tearing everything back down. And it really just comes down to this little thing here, is that I don't like taking off of time from some place that I really enjoy being. I think that's really just what it comes down to. And God has blessed me with a career where I'm able to actually empower college students. I'm able to give money and scholarships to college students, develop them as student leaders, hang out with them during the day. Like, I think I have a very fun job. So, like, I don't really mind going in on a Monday. As long as I'm making a difference and I'm able to make the difference in the lives of people around me, those are the kind of the things that I'm always going after. So all of this got me thinking about kind of the message here today, and it reminded me of a message I've heard a while ago from a previous pastor, and a book that I'm familiar with as well, by Rick Warren, well-known pastor, founder of Saddleback Church, and he has a book called A Purpose-Driven Church, and it's actually an offshoot of a really famous book that he has called The Purpose-Driven Life. If you have not read that book, definitely read that book. It's an amazing book. But one of the offshoots of that book was called A Purpose-Driven Church. And if you read the summary of it, you may think, okay, this is only for like pastors. This is only for like ministry people. But there's a section in there where he breaks down levels of going to church that I think really, really gets to kind of the individual level and really would help someone else on an individual level as well. So that's what I'm kind of going to be going through with you guys, is going through these 5 different levels. And I'm very much a structured guy, so this was like right up my alley. So I like organizing things. I want to know what my next step is. I want all of that kind of all night neat right in front of me. So that's what I'm going to kind of do here, is just kind of go through these 5 different levels. But as I'm going through it, very similar to my message back in December, as you're listening to me go through each one of these and scribe each of these different levels, start thinking, is this where I'm currently at? Is this where I'm currently at? At the end of each one of these, I'm going to have a next step, and this is going to be the action step that you can take to get to the very next level. And make sure you're putting down notes, writing down notes whenever you get to those next levels, and then what that next level actually is when you're going through it. So before we start, I'm going to pray. So, Lord, thank you so much for this morning. Thank you for this opportunity just to speak to your people, Lord. And I just pray, Lord, that barriers are down, Lord, hearts are softened, Lord, and you're able to just convey what you want to convey to the people here today. In Jesus' name, amen. So the verse I actually want to kind of start off with, I was going to start off with a completely different verse, but I was going to start off with this verse, and it's James 1, 22 through 25. I think I have it on the screen there, but I'm going to pull it up on my phone as well. Oh, I didn't start my timer. Oh, my gosh. It's going to go long today, guys. Okay. So James 1, 22 through 25, and I'm going to be reading it out of the Amplified translation here. But prove yourselves doers of the word, actively and continually obeying God's precepts, and not merely listeners who hear the word but fail to internalize it meaning, deluding yourselves by unsounding reason contrary to the truth. For if anyone only listens to the word without obeying it, he is like a man who looks very carefully at his natural face in a mirror. For once he has looked at himself and gone away, he immediately forgets what he looks like. But he who looks carefully into the perfect law, the law of liberty, and faithfully abides by it, not having become a careless listener who forgets, but an active doer who obeys, he will be blessed and favored by God in what he does in his life of obedience. And I want to start off by that because a lot of these levels really just come down to that. It's being doers rather than just hearers of the word. Are you actively doing these things? And I think a lot of what I'm going to be going through, it seems like very common knowledge. You kind of, nothing's going to be too like groundbreaking here, but it's really going to be just a mindset of, okay, I believe in all this, but am I actively doing each one of these? So I'm going to go through these steps here. I got my timer on here. Oh my gosh. Here we go. All right, I'm so good on time. I'm going to go through all of these, and as I'm doing it, really be thinking, am I at this level? And if I'm at this level, jot down, have a mental note, what your next step is and what the next level is. So the very first one that he talks about as levels of being at church, the first one is being a part of the crowd. And the tagline that he has for this is come and see. And the characteristics of this level is, do you find yourself just attending church, coming in, sitting down, kind of just observing what's going on? Maybe you're just soaking everything in. I think this is kind of the place we all land if we're like looking for a brand new church. Maybe we're trying to, see if this is the church that we want to actually be a part of. But you're really just kind of soaking everything in. You're trying to just come and get filled up. You have this idea of that, okay, I have to go to church, or like I really need to be going to church. This is kind of where you're at this point. And a few years after I got saved, so I actually got saved here in Omaha, Nebraska at the Omaha Vineyard. Oh man, it's been like over 20 years at this point. It was right in my senior year of high school. And about a couple years after that, when I was in college, I really felt like I was in this category of just being a part of the crowd when I started going to church during my college years. So during my junior year and my wife's sophomore year, that's when we met for the first time. And we started going to our church in our college town in Pittsburgh, Kansas. So we went to Pittsburgh State University, not to be confused with Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. We were in Kansas. And we went to this church right here. Oh man, I didn't calculate like having a mic in my hand as I was doing this. Here we go. But it's called FLAG. So it's Family Life Assembly of God. So this is the church that we really start off. And this was the church that I really went to and really was just a part of the crowd. I was there just to get filled up. I wasn't really involved. I wasn't really looking to be involved. I was a college student. I was really just there to just soak everything in. If it makes sense like this, is that this was the church where I actually finally began like paying attention to what the pastor was saying. Not to say the church that I was a part of that I got saved at, I wasn't listening, but this was the church where I felt like I was really on my own. My faith was my own, and I was really starting to just apply some of the stuff that the pastor was actually saying in my life. I felt like an actual like adult Christian at that point. And it really I love Psalm 51, 10 through 11 here, and I'll read it in the Passion Translation. Keep creating in me a clean heart. Fill me with pure thoughts and holy desires, ready to please you. May you never reject me. May you never take from me your sacred spirit. And I felt like that's what I was doing when I was at Flag Church. I was just getting filled up. And sometimes that's the season you need to be in. So I do want to say before I read through the rest of these, don't feel like any of these different levels are like a bad level or like a lesser level. Sometimes God needs you to be at the level that you're at so you're able to hear exactly what he wants you to hear at that moment. So you may be in a season you need to be there. But at the same time, he doesn't want to just leave you there. He always wants to take you somewhere else. So a next step for this level, if you're trying to go to this next level and you're like, okay, this is the level I'm currently at, a next step for you is to glow not for yourself and to have a teachable heart in everything that you're doing. So take everything in, kind of understand what God is maybe trying to show you in this moment and in this season of your life, but have that teachable heart. I love the vision of our church. So you'll always hear the mission of our church, to encounter God and to grow in a life-giving family. If you went through next steps, you should know the vision of our church as well. Pastor Matt talks about it from time to time. but it's the kind of the 50,000-foot view of kind of what they see Glow Church being. And it's to help people reflect God and to be stirred to action. And I really love that because he uses the whole analogy of the beach in Puerto Rico. There's like algae or rocks that are there, and like the whole beach glows at nighttime. And then the more the waves come in and stir things up, it like glows brighter as well. Yep. And that's what he always uses. He also did a message where he brought in these glow-in-the-dark rocks. And he really made a really good analogy about that to where, those glow-in-the-dark rocks, they have to spend time with the light, with a source. And they absorb all that, they soak it in, they get it filled up, and then at nighttime, they begin to glow. And they look awesome when they're glowing together. So when he had like all the rocks up here together, they were glowing. It looked fantastic in here. And it's always great to be filled up, be a part of a church service that's like that where you're glowing, everyone's hands are raised, and the worship is going really awesome. It's great when you're glowing together. But it's also great when you're able to take one of those rocks that are glowing and you're able to take it home with you. Or you can take it to your workplace, or you can just carry it wherever that you're going. And I think that's part of that having a next step of having that teachable heart is that making sure that you're not just glowing for yourself, but you're also glowing for people all around you as well. It's why we say ready, set, glow at the very end of every single service that we do. It's more of an action for you to go and glow in the world around you. So that's the first level right there. So crowd, come and see. The next level that is talked about in this book is the congregation. And the tag for this one is come and join. Characteristics of this is, do you find yourself lingering around after service, or do you find yourself showing up early and hanging out before service even begins? Do you find yourself saying yes to invites from people from church to like go out to lunch or to do things outside of church? Maybe it's the first time you've ever done that before, or maybe the first time you've done it in a very long time. Or you say this phrase a lot, this is my church. If you say that a lot, then I feel like you're in this congregation phase right here. And I really felt a part of the congregation and really felt like I was at this point when we were at our very first art church that we were ever a part of. And I really credit that church for being the church where I really took all of my next steps. I've talked about them before in my previous message as well. But it's when we were in Tallahassee, Florida, we went to Emerge Church here. Love this church, and I love the name of it because it was very much fitting to my walk with God. I was emerging as a Christian at that point. I think the story is that they were, their original church was Household of Faith in Gonzales, Louisiana, and then when they've been called to plant a church in Tallahassee, Florida, they were actually the youth pastors at that church. Their youth ministry was called Emerge, so they just took that name and made it into their actual church in Tallahassee. Really awesome. But I felt like that is when I really started to merge in my just my commitments and walk with God. And this is also the level that you may start making your first commitments that you ever make to God, and really where you start making your very first steps with God as well. And it's very fitting, because Emerge Church is where I really established a lot of those different commitments that I had. They were a portable church just like we are. We're a semi-portable right now. You don't have to tear down quite everything all the time. But especially when we first started in Ralston High School, they also started in the high school and cafeteria. We had to do like pipe and drape and everything like that. But I remember specifically, we were there the very first Sunday that it opened. We just got a flyer in the mail saying there's a brand new church opening up, and we went to it that day. But I remember it was like the fourth or fifth service that we were attended there. And we were talking to some of the dream teamers that were there, and then we were about to leave, and that's when I noticed that they were starting to stack chairs. And I was like, oh, that was like my first mindset shift of just like, oh yeah, this is a cafeteria in a high school. They have to turn this into a church all the time. And then I started just helping them stack chairs. I remember we stayed behind and we started doing that. And the next Sunday, we did it again. And the next Sunday, we did it again. The next Sunday, we learned how to take down pipe and drape. That's why we're like, me and Sherelle are really good at taking down pipe and drape. We did it a lot at Emerge Church. But we just kept doing it until it became a habit and just part of the culture there. And I know there's a lot of people in here, that's kind of where you came in with Glow Church. Because I remember being at the high school, and that was almost the culture with us when we were that portable of a church. After service, a lot of people stayed around and just helped us stack chairs and take down pipe and drape. And that's when you really became a part of that congregation that we had here at Glow Church. So a next step for this area, if you feel like, okay, this is the step that I'm currently in, I'm coming and I'm joining, I'm lingering around all the time, this is where I'm at. A next step for you, start developing non-negotiables. And I say non-negotiables, and I don't say just develop some commitments, because I feel like non-negotiables speak to who you are from that moment forward. There's a little bit more conviction in a non-negotiable than just setting up a goal or a commitment. And that's so important to me because a non-negotiable that our pastor at this church used to always talk about that their family had to eventually have. When he was a little kid, their mom has a picture frame above their fireplace, and it has that verse from Joshua, the very end of it, that says, as for me and my household, we will serve the Lord. And that was above their fireplace because there was a point of their family where they needed to do that. Every Sunday, they needed to be in church. It was a non-negotiable. They needed that for that season. And that's actually my second non-negotiable that I developed here at this church. So there were two non-negotiables. The first one I'll talk about a little bit later, but the second one was coming to church every single Sunday. So that's another reason why I'm always here, because that is kind of been a non-negotiable in my life, only because of where I know I came from. And I already told my salvation story back in December, but I'm at a point where I don't ever want to go back to that attempted suicide past of mine. I never want to go back to the depression. I never want to go back to the self-harm. I never want to go back to that ever again, which is why that became a non-negotiable and why I'm always in service and I never want to miss service. Develop your own non-negotiable, whatever it is for you that is going to get you to pursue God the way you need to pursue God. But start developing some non-negotiables in your life. The third level that he talks about in this book is called the committed. And these are the people that come and they grow. And this happened really strong with me when we moved to Des Moines, Iowa, and we started attending our second church plant, which is called Summit Creek Church. And this was the church where I really just kind of developed those commitments that I had, developed those non-negotiables. But it was a really good church where I was developing my leadership as well. Summit Creek, I think the pastor, he always talks about, he picked the name because Summit, you're achieving something. Creek, coming down the mountain, and, your gifts and your talents are flowing down to everyone behind you. That's absolutely not why he named it. So the funny story about that he sometimes tells, sometimes he does not tell. He did like the name Summit because it is like you're achieving something, but he simply put Creek on the end because he liked churches with Creek at the end of them. That's why he put it on there. I remember he said that, and I always thought that was hilarious. He doesn't really tell that story a lot. I probably shouldn't be telling it. But still, it was the church that I really felt like I was developing in my leadership. But there was one principle that I still remember from that church to this day. And I've already talked about it here on stage before, after worship during the prayer time a few weeks ago. I've mentioned it before, I think a while ago. But it's one of these principles that I feel like if we fully grasp it, as individuals and as a church, it will radically change us so much. And it's the idea that I've mentioned before of being a fan of Jesus. I've already gone through this so many times. I'll go through it again, but I'm going to rephrase it this time. And I'm going to ask it in terms of questions. And this is going to be a great way for you to figure out, am I just hearing all these 7 things and agreeing with them? Because all these 7 things we agree with and we absolutely understand. But am I actively doing it? That James chapter that I read at the very beginning, am I actively being a doer of these things? So I go through each one of these and just kind of think in your heart, are you actively doing these things? Or are you just agreeing it? Number 1, do you believe this is our year? Do you believe this is Glow's year? Do you believe this is our season? Do you believe that the fall is going to be our season? Are you expectant of what God is going to do? Do you believe no Sunday is a routine Sunday? That's the first one. Number 2, do you arrive early to the game? Are you here for pre-service prayer? Not because you have to, not to get spiritual points with Pastors Matt and Christy or with God or anything like that, but because you're a fan of Jesus or you're that in love with him. Are you actively lingering in God's house? Number 3, do you endure any type of weather? So if it's snowing or is it miserable, raining outside, are you still here? If it's beautiful outside and you know it's going to be beautiful on the weekend, are you still here? Not to say you need to hate rest. I'm the worst person to say that because I have over 1,000 hours of PTO that I'm not using. But still, Has that become a habit in your life? Whenever it's beautiful weather outside, oh yeah, we got to go and do this instead of going to God's house. Number 4, do you want the best seat in the house? Another great principle that I learned when I was at Summit Creek Church is leading from the front, setting the example for the people behind you to let them know this is how Glow Church worships. This is how Glow Church listens to the message. This is how Glow Church writes down notes. Are you actually leading from the front in everything that you're doing? Number 5, do you ever miss a game? And I've already kind of talked about this, but still, it sometimes convicts me a little bit that we'll go above and beyond and move mountains in our schedule to ensure we can make that sporting event or to make sure that we are attending that hobby of ours, some kind of event that has to do with that. And we don't do that for the things of God's house. Number 6, do you memorize the stats? So when we have baptism, do you celebrate and know how many people were baptized? Do you want to know how many people raise their hand at the end of service every single Sunday? Do you go after those type of answers? Do you know what number church plant we are? So I had to text Pastor Matt this earlier in this week to know, okay, we're part of the ARC network. What number church plant are we? We're number 827. So it's stats like that. We know stats about our sports teams. We know stats about our favorite players. If it's a hobby, we know stats about that. There is a game that just came out called Baldur's Gate 3. It came out on PC. I'm waiting for it to come out on PS5. All summer, I have been in the wiki pages trying to strategize and figure out, okay, this is the race I'm going to be. This is going to be the class. Do I want to be a druid? Do I want to be a wizard? I have been obsessing over this for so long all this summer. I cannot wait for this game to come out. But it's stuff like that. Are you obsessing over things like that more than you're obsessing over the stats and things of God's house? And then the very last one, do you mind paying for the game? So some of us will pay a good amount of prices for tickets to see your favorite team play somewhere. Some of us will pay a good amount of money to go and do something that's related to one of our hobbies. And this is actually the point that actually started me tithing for the very first time. So this was actually my very first non-negotiable when I was at Emerge Church, was actually tithing. I was one of those, I was like, okay, the Bible says test them and see what happens. Just I'm going to test them. I'm going to tithe for a year and see what actually happens in my life. Apparently, he's going to bless me like I can't understand. So I'm just like, okay, I'm going to do that. So I remember it was about 10, 12 years ago at this point, I mapped it all out, budgeted it. And I was just like, okay, I'm going to take my salary, I'm going to break it all down. And I came to a number. So back then, my tithe was $60 per week every time that offering bucket came by. And I was like, oh my gosh, $60 every single week. But what really convicted me about this, and I think God knew what he was doing with this, is that $60 back then was also how much a new video game cost. And you always hear that I'm very much a person that loves playing video games a lot. And whenever, especially during that time, I'm trying to think when it was 2012. I don't know, it was around that time period. That was almost a golden age. There was a really awesome game coming out every single week. And without batting an eye, I'm 100% buying those games every single week. So it was really funny and convicting to me that I didn't bat an eye about dropping $60 to play a video game, but whenever an offering bucket came by and $60 was the amount I was supposed to be putting into it, I was cringing a little bit. That's why it became a non-negotiable in my life, that tithing just had to happen. So next steps. After this, as you're looking at all this, are you a hearer? Are you actively actually doing these things? If you are, you're in this level right here. But last kind of next step for this, if you're wanting to go to the next one I'm about to mention, it's not just personally growing for yourself. Don't just grow for yourself. Grow for the people around you as well. I see this as kind of a mind shift in the way we think about going to church. Because I think when you're at this level of being the committed, church isn't necessarily for you. And don't hear what I'm not saying. So I'm not saying you're not going to get anything from the pastor's message. You're not going to get anything from worship. I'm not saying that. What I'm saying is that you're not dependent on Sunday mornings anymore to get filled up. You're already coming to Sunday mornings filled up and overflowed so that you can give it to someone else that desperately is thirsty and needing that living water in their life. So that's the thing. That's your next step if you're in this level. Are you not just growing for yourself, you're growing for someone else. And the next level that I'm going to talk about here is the core. And this is kind of the tagline for this one: come and serve. Not to be confused with come and help out, but come and legitimately serve. And I feel like the last one that we're a part of, because I haven't been part of any other church plants at this point, is Glow Church here. Yeah. So with Glow, it kind of moves you from this idea that the other three kind of already touched on a little bit. So with the crowd, you're kind of saying to yourself, oh, that's the church I go to. With the congregation, you're like, all right, this is my church. With the committed, I think you're just really thinking this is God's house. All three of those, you're still acknowledging the church, God's house, as being something other. Whereas when you get to this point right here, I feel like you have to understand that God's house is my house, is your house. You belong here. You have a claim in this house. You share in the responsibility of this house. You want to make sure this house is in top order before anyone comes into this house as well. And just think about it. When you have someone coming over to your own house, you're making sure everything is tidied up. You're making sure everything is swept, everything is just put together. You might even throw on like a candle, essential oils. Like, you're going to do that whole thing. If you're like doing dinner for guests, you're going to have the plates already set up. Everything is going to be organized, prepared, and ready for the guests to come in to make sure they feel welcome and they feel at home where you're at. And do we do that for God's house? Because you believe this is your house as well. So the very last thing that I'll talk about here as I close here, and I think there's 5 phrases that we go through as we go through all of these different levels. And I'll tell you what the 5th level is in a second, but I think we go through these 5 levels here right now. And I think with the very first one with the crowd, I think we have that mindset of, I have to go to church or I need to go to church. You're thinking that all the time if you're in that crowd kind of level. I think once you get to the congregation level, you're really thinking, I like coming to church. I really like being here. That's why you're lingering around. That's why that's one of the parts of that. Once you get to the committed, that's when you start thinking, I want to be in church. I want to grow. I want more of God. I want that so much more in my life. And when you get to the core, I think you also have this idea, similar to the very first one, but it's slightly different. And you think to yourself, I have to be in church. So another principle that I learned at a previous church as well, and the reason why sometimes I get so very into the details of how the environment looks here at Glow whenever we're doing service. Because I'm always very passionate that someone has their moment at any moment here in church. And it's really because of a principle that I learned, is that if I truly believe that heaven and hell are real places that people go, I need to have a sense of urgency to make sure that I am populating heaven and plundering hell as much as I can. And if you have that mindset and you truly believe those places are real, you have this mindset of, I have to be here to help people get to that next level. Which gets to my next step, which is the next statement that will kind of lead into the very last level here. In this last level, it's not even part of the original publication, I believe. I think he did an updated version where he added this level to it, and another level that I'll talk about here in a very little bit. But it's the statement that my wife says all the time, because it's something that we learned at a previous church. But you start saying to yourself, I get to go to church. It's a privilege to go to church. It's a privilege to help people to know God. It's a privilege to help people to find freedom from addictions in their life. It's a privilege to help people discover their purpose and to make a difference in the people around them. And I think if you have that mind shift of really understanding that you get to go to church and really wrap your mind around that, I think you can get to this very last level, which is the commissioned. And the phrase that he has for this one is go and die to yourself. And it's the idea of laying down your desires, your timelines, your wants, and instead going after his desires, his timelines, and his wants for your life. I think all of this that I've kind of talked about, all of these different levels, this is kind of a roadmap to faithfulness. in different aspects of your life, not just with church, but in different areas of your life where you're wanting to be more faithful in. So as I close here, just where are you at? Did you identify what level you were currently at? Did you identify the next step that you need to take? Did you identify the next level that maybe God is trying to bring you to? Really think about that. Mental note and have that kind of in your mind. But always remember this, that God loves us so much and always pursues us. But are we so in love with him that we pursue him with every opportunity that we have?